Chronic wasting disease. It's the deadly deer disease that cannot be ignored. I'm Sean Cayley, Manager Communications for the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. And with me today is Keith Munro, OFAH wildlife biologist. Keith is here to answer some key questions related to CWD. With that, we'll jump right into it. Keith, can you tell people that are watching what exactly CWD is?
So chronic wasting disease is one of a group of diseases known as transmissible spongiform encephalopathies. Now, I don't think many people have heard about that, but pretty much everyone will be familiar with another disease in that group, which is mad cow disease. So chronic wasting disease is one of these diseases that specifically affects members of the deer family. So in Ontario, we're talking white-tailed deer, moose, elk, and caribou. So this is a disease that was first detected in Colorado in the late 1960s, and since then has spread to 25 US states, now 3 Canadian provinces, as well as going overseas to Finland, Norway, and actually all the way to South Korea.
Wow.
Yeah, so this disease is caused by abnormally folded proteins known as prions, and it can be passed both from animal to animal. It can also build up in the environment. The proteins, they're not alive like we would consider bacteria to be alive. So they can actually remain infectious in, say, soil for years to come. The disease is highly infectious, it's incurable, and it's 100% fatal to members of the deer family.
That's a scary thought. I know you touched on it a little bit there in your previous answer, but if you could expand a little bit about how CWD is spread, give people a little bit of an understanding from that perspective.
For sure, because it's really, since the 60s, it's gone from being a local issue to, essentially going on global now.
So I call that widespread.
Yeah, definitely continental. There's a consensus among scientists that one of the key factors moving CWD is the deer farming industry. Okay. Animals can commonly have CWD but not show any sort of symptoms. So you can't look at an animal and say that has CWD. You may be looking at a deer and say it's totally healthy and then it's actually infected. There's also no live test for it. You can't test a live animal to see if it has the disease. Okay. This means that infected deer are frequently moved by the deer farming industry from farm to farm, infecting a new farm, and then that infection spreads to the wild population. This is a scenario we've seen sort of over and over again. The western provinces first got CWD when deer were moved from a South Dakota game farm into Lloydminster, Saskatchewan. Oh, wow. Those deer then were moved to other farms and spread to wildlife. And then kind of in an extreme example, deer from Saskatchewan were actually taken to South Korea, and they ended up with some cases of chronic wasting disease.
Wow. As I said, to kind of bookend your previous answer, this is scary, and I'm going to use that term again. It's absolutely scary. From a hunter's perspective, why do we need to be concerned?
So I think, when we talk about deer and hunting, we always want to think about how it's going to affect hunters, but I really argue this is a condition or a situation that's going to affect everyone. Yeah, so before coming to the OFAH, I've been working in white-tailed deer research for over 10 years. I really like that as a field of research because I can talk to anyone and it's a relatable species. White-tailed deer are just part of our Ontario landscape. And if you go beyond deer, moose. Yeah. Algonquin Park would not be Algonquin Park without moose. And the reason CWD we need to be concerned about it is because I said it's always fatal. Yeah. So white-tailed deer with CWD are 4.5 times more likely to die annually than deer without CWD. Yeah. Mule deer populations with CWD have shown like a 19% annual decrease in the same area where CWD or where herds without CWD are actually increasing. And you don't need to have CWD, permanently in your population to feel the effects. Yeah. One case of CWD in a new jurisdiction requires the management agencies to react very strongly with culls. You want to ensure that you're getting any infected animals off the landscape. Right now, Quebec's culling hundreds of deer in the area around those game farms. And kind of in the extreme example, Norway just depopulated an entire wild reindeer herd, 2,000 animals.
Oh, wow.
And I think of that in a Ontario wildlife population.
Yeah, I mean, how far would you have to go in Ontario to find a couple thousand deer? It's challenging to think about.
Yeah, and then even just going back to hunters, I mean, I make the case that this would fundamentally change our hunting traditions. I mean, our group, we shoot a deer, we take it back to camp, the heart comes out, the tenderloins come out, and we have a celebratory meal.
Yeah.
Health Canada, Canadian Food Inspection Agency says, even though there's no direct evidence that CWD can affect humans, you should not consume meat from a CWD infected animal.
Yeah. So those processes at your camp and thousands of others would change.
Yeah, if you have to wait for the testing results to come back, that tradition is gone.
Yeah. There's a lot of important questions related to CWD. We've heard from a lot of people through social media, through calls, emails, and just general interest here at OFAH head office. But one of the biggest questions in my mind, Keith, and I'll pose this to you right now, is what needs to be done to protect Ontario's wildlife from CWD?
So the most important thing about CWD management is ensuring that it doesn't get here. We've been very supportive and continue to support the MNRF's CWD surveillance program. We're actually incentivizing hunters in Eastern Ontario to submit samples this year. Any hunter that contacts the roving crews to submit a sample will actually get an OFAH Hunter Orange hat as a thank you. But surveillance is not prevention. It tells us when it's here, and then we have to respond to it, which is those aggressive calls and monitoring. Yeah. So you need to really prevent it from getting here, and really that focuses on the movement of animals for the captive deer farming industry.
So we have to look at this as proactive response rather than reactive response.
Exactly. We need policies in place to address this very clear, we know where the risk is going to come from. We need to address that. We just sent letters to the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry and the Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, basically asking them to work together to ensure 4 things. We want tighter regulation and restrictions on the movement of both native and non-native animals moved for the deer farming industry. We want tighter biosecurity on the farms that have these animals, so good double fencing to ensure that animals don't get out. And then when animals do get out, which happens, all too frequently, we want them to deal with those escapes decisively. The MNRF just took a lot of backlash online for shooting farm elk that was running around the Lindsay area. But biologically, that was the right thing to do. Those animals are a risk to our native wildlife. And then the last thing is really this risk will persist until we get rid of the game farming industry, the deer farming industry. So we've actually proposed a phase out of this industry with compensation for farmers.
Yeah. Okay.
And I want to point out that these positions we're taking aren't a response to this Quebec outbreak. We're on the record going back to the early 90s, saying
1991,
saying these exact same things. And these aren't stuff that we've come up with. This is what the scientific community recognizes as the risk, and we're trying to address it.
We obviously just spent a little bit of time talking about a lot of things that could and should happen as far as policy around CWD and keeping it out of Ontario, that sort of thing. Generally speaking, what can people do to help in the process right now?
So I touched on the surveillance program. Yep. So if you're a hunter hunting in one of the 2 areas this year that have the surveillance going on, and we've got all the information on that on our website, ofah.org/CWD, you should submit samples or get the MNRF crews to come out and take samples for any adult deer that you harvest. The monitoring is completely dependent on hunters submitting samples, and if we don't monitor, we can't respond. The next thing hunters should do is they should know the rules around using natural attractants, which is illegal because that can spread these prions. They should know the rules around bringing deer parts from outside of Ontario back into Ontario. There's restrictions on sort of the high-risk body parts. You can't bring in things like heads or spinal cords or internal organs. And then those are concrete things that hunters can do. But if you're not a hunter, if you're a landowner, let hunters onto your property.
Yeah.
We need samples, and we need samples from across broad areas. So if you've got area where you're not allowing hunting, deer are gonna
They're gonna
they're gonna clue in on that.
They're gonna find a little home there, and we won't know what's going on.
Exactly. And then anyone who sees sick or strange acting deer anywhere in the province should be contacting their local district office to get those deer tested.
Yeah. Their MNRF district office.
Yeah, sorry,
for clarity's sake.
their MNRF district office. And then the last thing that I'm really trying to tell people to do is just get informed about CWD and then talk to your friends and family about it. It's a new disease. We don't have it in Ontario. We're very lucky. Therefore, there's not a big awareness of it. So we really need to make people aware of it, to have them appreciate the huge risk this presents to our sort of key, native wildlife species. Yeah. And we really all need to work together on this.
No, absolutely. I couldn't put it any better myself, Keith. And thank you for taking the time to have this discussion. It's an important one to have. And as Keith said, for those of you who feel the need and want to become more informed on CWD, you can find all the information you need at ofah.org/CWD.